And we'll next recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Lieu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Issa, for holding this important hearing. I'd like to follow up on Chairman Nadler's questions about inherent contempt, which is the power of Congress to impose consequences on both public and private sector witnesses who ignore congressional subpoenas. Ms. Bean, my first question is to you. Prior to World War II, Congress used this power a number of times. Is that correct?
Yes.
And just because Congress hasn't used this power in a while doesn't mean we don't have the power of inherent contempt. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And one of these powers would be the ability of Congress to impose fines on witnesses who disregard congressional subpoenas, correct?
Well, I believe Congress has that authority, although it's never been used, to impose civil fines.
Congress actually used even more powerful authority, which is, in fact, we put people in jail for ignoring congressional subpoenas. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much. Mr. Hunger, you are absolutely correct that the first time Congress reuses its power will likely be litigated. You're in private practice and you understand that incentives matter. And so right now, the current incentive, let's say with Dahmer Gant, is even as a private citizen, he can simply ignore the congressional subpoena. And at the end of the day, if the courts say he has to show up, he shows up and then he testifies. But if there was an actual consequence there where not only would he have to show up, but he might have to pay a fine of, let's say, $50,000 if he was wrong in the litigation, that would provide a pretty powerful incentive for someone to, in fact, not challenge in court and to show up. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. I mean, particularly for private subjects of congressional investigations, the cost and risk of litigating those issues would be substantial, and private parties generally try to avoid getting into that position in the first place.
Thank you. And Mr. Fernandez, I thought you made a good point about time. In terms of Congress, particularly the House of Representatives, we operate in 2-year cycles. And that means the House could flip, chairmanships could change. So if a witness is able to delay a congressional subpoena more than 2 years, often it'll be less than 2 years because Congress usually doesn't issue a subpoena on day one of Congress. If they can simply delay it for, let's say, a year and a half, oftentimes circumstances could change so radically that essentially the congressional subpoena becomes meaningless. Isn't that correct, Mr. Fernandez?
That's exactly correct, Congressman.
So let me take my remaining time to just offer some thoughts. Both Democratic and Republican administrations have ignored congressional subpoenas. And it is wrong when Republicans do it. It's wrong when Democrats do it. And we saw, for example, that when a Democratic administration delayed for more than 2 years having a witness show up, that the Republicans didn't fix that when Republicans were in control of the House and the Senate. Let's not make that mistake again. Democrats control the House and the Senate. Just because we believe we have a good president doesn't mean that we're gonna have future presidents that won't do exactly what the former president did and run roughshod over the Constitution and Congress and the American people. We need to rein in the executive branch. And I just want to note that under the Department of Justice, under Merrick Garland's leadership, it has taken the exact same view of maximizing presidential power to the point of absurdity. It is refusing to release the Barr memo. It is refusing to even say that the DC court panel case that said congressional subpoenas are meaningless was wrongly decided. In fact, it supports that decision. And then recently, the Department of Justice says it is going to act as the former president's private attorneys to defend the defamation lawsuit by Ms. Carroll. So this is the same exact Department of Justice that has been maximizing presidential power to the great harm of our separation of powers, that is shredding the way the framers set up our Constitution. And we as a Congress need to rein in the executive branch. If we don't pass any reforms, to try rein in executive branch, then shame on us. I yield back.